My name is Daniel Carter, and I live in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Plano, Texas. Or at least, it used to be quiet before my neighbor decided to make my life into something that felt like a low-budget horror movie mixed with a twisted comedy routine. Every Sunday, right at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would hear a faint thud against my porch or somewhere near the side door. At first, I thought it was some stray cat or maybe a raccoon rummaging around. But no, the truth was stranger, more disgusting, and eventually more terrifying. What landed on my property every Sunday was a rotten, dead mouse. It started one spring night in April. I had just settled back into bed after grabbing a glass of water from the kitchen when I heard the sound. Thump. Soft, wet, like a piece of fruit falling off a counter. I ignored it until the morning, and when I stepped outside to fetch the Sunday paper, I nearly gagged. There, on the welcome mat, was the mouse, its body bloated, flies already circling. I cursed, got a shovel from the shed, and threw the damn thing into a trash bag. I thought it was some freak accident, maybe an owl dropping its kill. I washed the mat with bleach and carried on. The next Sunday at the exact same hour, the same sound woke me. This time I went to check immediately, and my heart dropped. Another dead mouse. And not just any mouse. This one was stiff, obviously frozen before being tossed, like it had been saved for the occasion. That was when I realized somebody was doing this on purpose. I started to watch the clock at night. Every Saturday I stayed up late, and sure enough, the following week, at precisely 3 a.m., the noise came again. I flung open the blinds in the living room, and across the fence I saw him. My neighbor, Richard. Tall, bony, wearing a flannel shirt despite the Texas heat, holding something in his hand. His arm swung, and the object flew into my yard. I knew right then he had crossed some line that no man in suburbia should ever cross. Richard was a strange man, lived alone in a one-story ranch-style house that looked like it had stopped existing in 1985. His lawn was patchy, his blinds were always half open, and he had a way of staring too long at people when they pulled into their driveways. The kind of neighbor who never came to block parties but somehow knew every detail of what cars you owned or what time your kids got home. People whispered about him in the cul-de-sac, but no one really wanted to get involved. Now he had chosen me. At first, I tried to reason it out. Maybe he thought it was funny. Maybe it was some twisted hobby. Or maybe, and this thought crawled into my brain late at night, he was trying to send a message. But a message about what? We had barely exchanged words in the 3 years I had lived next door. My wife, Kelly, thought I was exaggerating. "You are making it sound bigger than it is," she said, as I held up the plastic bag containing the third mouse in as many weeks. She wrinkled her nose but refused to acknowledge the ritualistic precision of it all. "Call pest control," she added. Pest control. As if Terminix could stop a lunatic with a deep freezer full of corpses. By May, my Sundays were ruined. I could not sleep on Saturday nights. I sat in the dark, blinds slightly open, sipping black coffee, staring at his house. The moment the clock ticked 3, I would hear it. Sometimes I even imagined the sound before it happened. My nerves were frayed. My hands shook when I typed at work. My boss at the insurance office asked if I had started drinking again. I went to the police. Officer Bradley at the Plano Police Department actually chuckled. "Sir, do you want us to make an arrest because a man threw a mouse? Do you know how that sounds on paper?" I showed him the pictures, the timestamps, the bags I had kept in the garage freezer as evidence. He wrinkled his nose but shook his head. "Not much we can do unless he threatens you directly." I even brought it up at the Homeowners Association meeting, which met every first Wednesday at St. Mark's Church. The president, a heavy-set woman named Carol with a fondness for bylaws, said, "Daniel, unless it affects property value, it is outside our jurisdiction." The neighbors laughed awkwardly, sipping their styrofoam cups of coffee, pretending not to see the desperation in my eyes. So, I was alone. By June, the mice had grown worse. One came half decayed, maggots wriggling in its eye socket. Another came soaked in some kind of rancid liquid, as if he had marinated it. I began to think Richard was escalating. It was not just a prank anymore. It was psychological warfare. My son Matthew, only 10 years old, cried one Sunday morning when he opened the door before I could stop him. The look on his face, the way he clung to Kelly's arm, begging not to go outside again, I will never forget that. That was the moment I swore I would not just endure this, I would end it. One Sunday night, I caught Richard in the act more clearly than ever before. The security light I had installed on the side of my house blazed to life as he raised his arm. The mouse hung for a split second in the air, silhouetted against the pale moon, before landing on the concrete, and for the first time, he looked directly at me, standing there in the shadows of my window. He smiled. That smile split something inside me. It was no longer just disgust or anger. It was war. A suburban war, silent and grotesque, fought not with guns or fists, but with rotting carcasses and sleepless nights. I realized the cops were not going to help. The HOA would never care, and my wife could not understand. If I wanted peace, I had to take it. I began writing notes in a spiral-bound notebook, outlining his routines. What time he took the trash to the curb, what groceries he carried from his old Ford pickup, when he watered the few patches of grass that still clung to life on his lawn. I logged it all like a detective. I was becoming someone I barely recognized, obsessed, restless, eyes darting to the blinds whenever I heard a sound. The mice were not just vermin anymore. They were symbols. Symbols of violation, of dominance, of the fact that in America, sometimes the monster you fear does not come from the woods or the city. It comes from the house right next door. And in the back of my mind, as I sat awake at 2:59 a.m. waiting for the thud, I started hearing a different sound. A whisper, faint, insistent, like the mice themselves had something to say, like they were telling me to strike back. To show Richard that neighbor revenge was not just an option, it was destiny. That was when the story truly began. The night after I swore to take matters into my own hands, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence like a detective out of a crime show. Plastic bags with mice double-sealed, photographs spread across the wood grain, time-stamped notes written in black Sharpie. Kelly stood in the doorway, shaking her head, arms crossed tight across her chest. "You are losing it, Daniel. You are obsessed with this man. You are giving him exactly what he wants." Maybe she was right, but she did not hear the whispering. At 3 o'clock sharp, every Sunday, the whispering came, the thud of the mouse, and then the silence that felt like a taunt. It was like Richard had tuned himself to some cosmic clock, as if he knew the hour when my defenses were lowest. And every week, my rage grew heavier than the garbage bags filling my freezer. I tried another call to the police. This time, I brought everything: pictures, samples, my notebook. Officer Bradley barely looked up from his desk. "Mr. Carter, you cannot keep bringing us dead animals and expect an arrest. Do you understand how this looks?" I slammed the notebook down. The force startled him enough that his chair squeaked back. "It looks like harassment," I shouted. A younger officer snickered in the corner. Bradley rubbed his temples. "Look, Daniel, we can send someone by to talk to him, but unless he confesses or you catch him throwing it in front of a witness, there is nothing we can do." A talk. As if Richard would break down and admit, "Yes, officer, I love chucking mice into Daniel's yard." It was absurd. I began to live my life around Richard's routines. In the mornings, I peered through the blinds as he shuffled to his mailbox. At night, I watched his windows glow with the pale light of some television I could never quite make out. He never had visitors, never went to block parties. But the moment I stepped outside to water my lawn, he would appear, always too close, always watching. Sometimes he waved, as if we were friends. His smile was too wide, his teeth too even. One afternoon in June, I caught him standing in his driveway, staring directly at my son Matthew, riding his bike in circles. No words, no gesture, just staring. I stormed outside. "What the hell are you looking at, Richard?" He tilted his head, gave that same unsettling smile, and walked back into his house without a word. That night, another mouse arrived. Bigger this time, its body twisted as though broken on purpose. I could not take it anymore. I decided to install cameras, the kind that ping your phone whenever motion is detected. I lined them across the eaves of my roof, hid one in the bushes, and even mounted a dummy one on the shed just to spook him. When the first notification hit at 3:01 a.m., I rushed to my phone, heart pounding, and there he was. Richard, in grainy black and white, arm raised, object in hand. He flung it. The mouse arced through the air and splattered on my porch. My phone buzzed, storing the clip automatically. Finally, I had him. I brought the video to the next HOA meeting. Carol adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the laptop I had lugged in. The clip played. Richard's shadowy form appeared, the motion clear as daylight. The room gasped. Some muttered. One older man laughed nervously. "That is disgusting," Carol said, but then she raised a hand. Unfortunately, this is outside our regulations. It is disturbing, yes, but it is not technically a violation. I stared at her. So if he painted my garage door pink, you would care. But throwing dead animals? That is fine? Carol pursed her lips. Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. The neighbors avoided my eyes. When the meeting ended, no one spoke to me. It was then I realized I was not just fighting Richard. I was fighting indifference. I was the crazy man shouting about dead mice while everyone else sipped coffee and pretended life was normal. But life was not normal. My obsession grew. I started skipping church, stopped meeting friends for poker night. Instead, I sat in my backyard under the humming floodlights, a thermos of coffee beside me, a notebook on my lap. I wrote down every flicker of movement, every light switching on in Richard's house. My coworkers noticed. You all right, Dan? One asked. I nodded, but the circles under my eyes told another story. Then came the escalation. One Sunday, instead of a mouse, I found a rat. Its tail stretched across the porch like a rope, its body swollen, stinking so badly I nearly vomited. Richard was not just keeping up his ritual, he was upping the ante. The next week, it was 2 mice, bound together with a piece of twine. The week after, a mouse stuffed inside a fast food cup from Sonic, the logo stained with grease. He was playing with me. That was when I realized this was no ordinary harassment. Richard was orchestrating a psychological operation, like some suburban CIA experiment. He wanted me to break, to lose credibility, to end up muttering about rodents until the neighbors called me insane. But I would not give him the satisfaction. Instead, I turned his tactics back on him. I began keeping the mice, not just in bags in the freezer, but in a locked cooler in the garage. Kelly gagged when she found out. Daniel, you are becoming him, she cried. Maybe she was right, but I told myself it was temporary. Evidence, ammunition, neighbor revenge waiting to be deployed. I started thinking of Richard not as a man, but as an enemy combatant. My notes became battle plans. I sketched his house, marking entrances, windows, fence lines. I logged his car trips to Walmart, his rare visits to the gas station. He had a pattern. Everyone has a pattern. And when you know the pattern, you can strike. Sometimes I caught myself laughing at how absurd it all was. A middle-aged insurance worker with a notebook full of reconnaissance notes, treating a skinny recluse as if he were a Soviet spy. But the laughter turned into a kind of thrill. For the first time in months, I felt power. Richard thought he was in control, but he had underestimated me. One night, I stood at the window staring across at his house, and I swear I saw movement in his backyard. A shadow digging, the sound of a shovel scraping dirt carried across the still air. My mind raced. Was he burying something? Was it more mice? Or was it something worse? A dog? A body? I scribbled it all down, my handwriting jagged, frantic. The whispering in my head grew louder. The mice wanted revenge. They wanted justice. I imagined calling the local news. Imagine a segment on Channel 5, Suburban Terror, Man Torments Neighbor with Dead Rodents. His face plastered across the screen, his shame undeniable. But that was too easy, too clean. I wanted him to feel the rot, the paranoia, the way I felt every Sunday at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was when the idea struck me. If Richard thought he could own the night, I would take it from him. If he thought he could control the game, I would change the rules. This was no longer about defense. This was about offense, about crafting the perfect counterstrike, about showing him that neighbor revenge was not just possible, it was inevitable. I woke up one morning and realized I had crossed the line, not because of Richard, but because of myself. The notebook on my nightstand had diagrams of his house sketched like a military dossier, arrows pointing to weak spots in his fence, notes on probable shovel activity. I had written the words Operation Rodent Justice in bold capital letters across the top page. It should have scared me. Instead, I felt a surge of pride. This was not madness, I told myself. It was strategy. This was the American way. When somebody comes onto your property, when somebody disrespects your castle, you do not just stand by. You build a plan, you sharpen your tools, and you hit back harder. Neighbor revenge was not just some childish impulse. It was a duty. The first step was supplies. I drove to Home Depot with a list that looked suspiciously like a contractor's estimate. Floodlights, motion sensors, bags of mulch, 2x4s, padlocks, and one heavy-duty cooler. I tossed it all into a cart, ignoring the curious glance from the cashier. She asked, Big project? I smiled the kind of smile a man gives when he knows something others do not. Yeah, I said. Big project. I spent the weekend rigging my yard like Fort Knox. Floodlights that triggered when a squirrel crossed the lawn. Cameras disguised in birdhouses. Even a fake security sign planted in the ground. This property is under surveillance. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The irony was not lost on me. The real criminal lived right across the fence, but now at least I had created the illusion of invincibility. But the truth was, defense was not enough. I needed a fence, so I started thinking petty. Real suburban petty. The kind of pettiness that defines America's cul-de-sacs and gated communities, where men fight silent wars with lawnmowers and passive-aggressive notes. Step 1. Water warfare. I reprogrammed my sprinkler system so that every morning at 7:15, just as Richard walked down his driveway to fetch his paper, the sprinklers erupted in a geyser, soaking him head to toe. He jumped, cursed, and glared across the street, but I stood sipping coffee from my porch like a king surveying his domain. Step 2. Noise. I bought a Bluetooth speaker and buried it near the fence line, hidden under mulch, every Sunday at 2:45 a.m. 15 minutes before his scheduled toss, the speaker came alive with the sound of cats screeching, owls hooting, and the hiss of snakes. Country predators in stereo. I imagined him pacing his kitchen, wondering if the wilderness had moved into suburbia overnight. Step 3. Symbolic retaliation. I began placing small rubber mice on his lawn ornaments, his garden gnomes, his tacky flamingo, even the plastic deer that guarded his front flower bed. Every morning he would come out to find them staring at him with lifeless eyes, mocking his ritual. I told myself it was poetic justice. The Mouse King had finally met his court jesters, but it was not enough. I needed spectacle. I needed everyone to see what he had done. That was when I came up with the projector idea. I borrowed a portable projector from Matthews Middle School, under the excuse of testing it for an educational documentary. I set it up in my garage, aiming it straight at the broad white panel of Richard's garage door. Every Sunday at 3:05 a.m., right after he finished his toss, I played back the footage of him doing it from the week before. There he was, in grainy black and white, tossing his mouse again and again like a looped nightmare. And the best part? The footage played on his own house. I watched from my upstairs window as Richard stumbled outside one night, looking up at his garage door as his own crime played larger than life. His shoulders tensed, his head whipped back and forth, searching for the source. But I sat in the dark, holding the remote like a general pressing the launch button. I laughed so hard I had to bury my face in a pillow. Still, there were nights when the paranoia twisted my thoughts into something stranger. The whispering of the mice grew louder. Sometimes I thought I saw them in the corners of my house, standing upright, whispering strategies like tiny furry advisors. "He digs at night," they hissed. "He buries things. You must uncover them." I would jolt awake at the sound of scratching in the walls, convinced Richard had unleashed an army of rodents trained to infiltrate my home. That was when the conspiracy theories took root. What if Richard was not acting alone? What if he was part of some cult, an underground society that communicated through offerings of dead vermin? I scoured the internet at 2 a.m, stumbling across forums filled with stories of occult rituals, of mice used in dark ceremonies. Could my neighbor be a pawn in something larger, a rodent Freemason? Kelly found me one night, bleary-eyed at the computer, reading about government mind control experiments involving ultrasonic frequencies. "Daniel," she whispered, "you are scaring me." But I could not stop. The patterns were too clear, the timing too precise. Richard was no fool, he was part of something. And so, my plan grew bolder. I decided that if the system would not stop him, I would bring the system to him. I compiled every photo, every video, every timestamp, and printed them into a thick binder. I titled it The Rodent Dossier. Then I sent anonymous copies to the HOA board, the police department, and, because I wanted a show, the local Channel 5 news desk. The stage was set, but there was one more card to play, something personal, something that would make him feel the way I felt every Sunday at 3 a.m, violated, disgusted, powerless. So I took one of his own gifts, one of the bloated rats I had preserved in the garage cooler, and packaged it carefully in a Walmart bag. I slipped on gloves, crept across the street in the dead of night, and tucked it gently into his mailbox with a note written in block letters. "I think you dropped this." When Richard opened his mailbox the next day, his scream echoed down the street like a fire alarm. Curtains twitched, doors opened, neighbors peeked out. He stormed into the yard, waving the bag like a maniac, shouting my name. I stood calmly watering my lawn, the hose hissing, my coffee steaming on the porch rail. "Everything all right, Richard?" I asked sweetly. His face turned red as a Texas sunset. For the first time since this nightmare began, the power shifted. He was rattled. He was humiliated. And I was no longer the crazy one. But the war was not over. No, this was just the beginning of the end. Because Richard had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. He thought I was just another neighbor, just another quiet suburban man. He forgot that in America, neighbor revenge is not a hobby. It is a tradition. The morning after Richard found the rat in his mailbox, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. I could hear them through the thin summer air, the way gossip slides between hedges and down driveways. Mrs. Langley across the street whispered to her husband, "Did you hear Richard screaming yesterday? Something about a dead rat in his mail?" Kids on bicycles circled his house like it was a haunted mansion. Even the mailman slowed his truck to a crawl, wary of approaching the cursed mailbox. Richard, meanwhile, had come unhinged. He paced his driveway shirtless, waving his arms, muttering loudly enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes he pointed at me, shouting words I could not make out. Other times he just sat on his porch, staring across the street, rocking back and forth like he was rehearsing a confession to no one. It was the perfect setup for what I had planned next. The annual neighborhood barbecue was coming up, held every July in the cul-de-sac near the fire hydrant. Usually, it was a tame affair. Kids playing tag, adults sipping Bud Light from coolers, Carol from the HOA lecturing people about recycling bins. But this year, it would be different. This year, it would be my stage. On the day of the barbecue, I arrived early with my son Matthew and set up a portable projector against the side of my garage. While the burgers sizzled on the grill and the smell of barbecue sauce drifted through the air, I quietly connected my laptop, queued up the footage, and waited for the right moment. At 7 o'clock, just as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Carol called for attention. "Thank you all for coming. Let's celebrate another great year in our community." People clapped politely, beer cans popped open, laughter drifted through the air. That was when I stepped forward. "Before we continue," I said, my voice steady, "I think the neighborhood deserves to see something important. Something that has been happening right under our noses." Heads turned, conversations quieted. Even the kids stopped chasing each other and froze mid-game. I pressed play. On the side of my garage, Richard appeared in ghostly black and white. He crept across his lawn at 3 o'clock in the morning, arm raised, the dead mouse dangling like a grotesque offering. He flung it over the fence. The neighbors gasped. Then the clip looped, showing him again and again, each toss more damning than the last. "Every Sunday," I said, "at exactly 3 a.m. for months." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That is disgusting." I knew something was off about him. "Who even does that?" Someone gagged audibly. Richard stumbled forward, his face pale in the glow of the projection. "He is lying," he shouted. "This is fake. Deep fakes. Do not believe this." His voice cracked with desperation, but the evidence was undeniable. There he was, caught in the act, frozen on the wall of his own community. Carol's face hardened. For the first time, she looked shaken. "Richard, is this true?" she asked. He sputtered, waved his arms, but no one defended him. Neighbors pulled their kids closer. The circle around him widened, like he carried a contagion. And then it happened. The children, emboldened by the adults' silence, began chanting, "Mouse Man! Mouse Man! Mouse Man!" Their voices rose, mocking, relentless. Richard covered his ears, stumbled backward, and fled into his house, slamming the door. The crowd erupted in nervous laughter, a release of months of suspicion and unease. I stood there, bathed in the glow of my victory, sipping a Bud Light handed to me by one of the dads. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt whole. The whispers in my head, the voices of the mice went quiet, satisfied. Neighbor revenge had been served cold, like a dead mouse in a mailbox, but the story did not end that night. Over the next week, Richard's world unraveled. The HOA fined him for unsanitary behavior after Carol, desperate to save face, dug up a bylaw about pest control. Church members stopped greeting him on Sundays, his mailbox filled with mocking notes. "Need more freezer space? Rat King of Plano." His house, once just shabby, became cursed ground. Realtors avoided it. Kids dared each other to run up and touch the porch before sprinting away. And then, one August morning, a moving truck appeared. Richard loaded his few belongings, old furniture, boxes, his battered Ford pickup, and drove away. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. The neighborhood celebrated in quiet ways. A block party felt lighter. People waved more. Even Carol smiled at me once, though it looked like it hurt. The mice stopped coming. For the first time in months, I slept through a Sunday night. But victory has a strange taste. Sweet at first, then hollow. I found myself walking outside at 3 a.m. out of habit, expecting the thud, the ritual. When it did not come, I felt empty. The silence was worse than the noise. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind only the hum of the streetlights and the faint buzz of cicadas. Kelly noticed too. "You got what you wanted," she said. "Why do you still look haunted?" I had no answer, because the truth was, the smell lingered. The memory lingered. Every time I opened the garage, I thought I could still catch the faint odor of decay, even though the cooler was long gone. Every shadow on the lawn felt like it might be Richard returning for one final toss. One night, weeks after he left, I woke to a sound. Thump. My heart froze. I crept downstairs, baseball bat in hand, sweat pouring down my neck. I flung open the door. Nothing. Just the wind, rattling the flag on my porch. But when I looked down, there was a single object on the welcome mat. A rubber mouse. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Maybe a kid left it as a joke. Maybe it was fate, mocking me. Either way, I picked it up, turned it in my hands, and whispered, "It is over." Because in the end, neighbor revenge is never really about beating the other man. It is about reclaiming your own sanity, your own nights of sleep, your own backyard peace. Richard was gone, but the lesson remained. You cannot choose your neighbors, but you can choose whether to fight or to endure. And me, I chose to fight, and I won. At least that is what I tell myself.